We're very excited to have Rob here from Adeptus Psychonautica, which is, I think, a fantastic YouTube channel doing a lot of good work. I think I first came into contact with your channel looking for some, how should we say this, practical advice concerning space travel. And yeah, and his channel's great. It's got a lot of interviews with other psychonauts as well as trip reports, so I would really recommend checking it out. And yeah, this is sort of the first in what I hope is a long-running series of not just having academics at universities speaking in a sort of distant way about the experiences that other people have had, but really having people come and speak to us who are adventuring themselves. So, without any further ado, Rob, take it away.
Thank you. So, my name is Rob, and I am known in the kind of online psychedelic community as Adeptus Psychonautica. Yeah, I've been using psychedelics for over 30 years now. I kind of discovered them when I was a teenager, quite a young teenager. That was just the culture where I grew up in Manchester in England. And yeah, needless to say, I think they are absolutely amazing. But that said, I do like to have very honest conversations around these things. I don't think these are like unicorns and rainbows and a magic bullet that solves everything. And so this is kind of what I try and do on my channel, just have very honest, open conversations about these amazing substances. I'll just say up front, in case it's not blatantly obvious, I am not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a kind of wannabe shaman or guru or any of that stuff. I consider myself to be just fairly ordinary, and I think that's kind of why I've got some traction with the work I do on YouTube. It's just because I'm just talking about my journey through these fairly extraordinary experiences and just finding out what works for me and just trying to talk about it in a very sort of no bullshit kind of way. Pretty much everything I'm going to say tonight is based purely on my own subjective experiences. I'm not trying to declare that this is like the fundamental truths of the universe, or this is like hardcore science. Like I said, that's not me at all. This is simply what happened to me. And if nothing else, then I hope you find it interesting as a story from a fellow traveler. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be mostly talking about this stuff. NN-DMT, probably my favorite psychedelic substance, just because it's ridiculously bonkers. It's just the most awesome experience I've ever had. Even, as I say, growing up, experiencing psychedelics for many, many years, when I came across DMT, it was just a game changer for me. I mean, it really was a game changer. It was absolutely life-changing for me. I would describe DMT, when taken at a full breakthrough dose, as the most extraordinary experience available to a human being on the entire planet. Specifically though, what I'm going to talk about tonight is having this extraordinary experience for 30 days in a row consecutively. So got a bit of an agenda of what we're going to do here. We're going to have a little bit of an introduction and sort of set up a bit of backstory. I'm going to talk you through what the inspiration was for, like, why the hell did I do this, this 30 days in hyperspace? What actually happened? What was the outcome, the benefits, the learnings, if anything? And then at the end, we'll have time for Q&A if you've got anything you want to ask me. In terms of time, I believe we've got about an hour in total. The talk will be about 40 minutes, so we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. And after that, I'm just going to be floating around, so if anybody wants to come and have a chat or talk to me, or if anyone knows a good place to go and have some drinks afterwards, I'm all ears. Yeah, please come over. You're most welcome. So a little bit of background. What the fuck is Adeptus Psychonautica? So I'm often asked why I chose this name and like what it means, and the answer, like a lot of things we're going to talk about tonight, is just a series of like seemingly separate threads that kind of wove together in a way that just felt right. I mean, first I just like the sound of it. I've always kind of liked these kind of Latin sounding names. They sound very occult. It's got this very like occult, mystical vibe to it, so that kind of appealed to me. But there is some meaning behind the wordage here. So adeptus is a Latin word. It means one who has been initiated into or who has obtained knowledge. And this specific knowledge that it referred to was alchemy. As you might be aware, alchemy is the study of the transmutation of matter and energy, which is made possible by summoning these, extraordinary objects through hyperdimensional portals. And all that might sound vaguely familiar to anyone who's taken DMT. So this word adeptus, it kind of really resonated with me. And one of the reasons was it doesn't imply mastery. It's someone who's been initiated into, someone who has started walking that path but isn't the grandmaster. So it felt like it suggested someone who was still learning. It had some kind of humility in it. And I think that's something that can be sometimes missing from the psychedelic space. Psychonautica. Psychonautica is a kind of a little bit of a made-up word, to be honest. Obviously, it's an extension of the word psychonautics, or from psychonaut. Psychonaut being a sailor of the mind. But yeah, I kind of, when I extended this out to Psychonautica, what I had in mind was like Psychonautica being the kind of extended branch, the sort of the academic branch of psychonautics. So kind of like in Roman sort of times, there was the Collegia Militarium, that was like the study of military strategy. There was the Collegia Astronomica, this was the study of the stars. And I kind of imagine in some distant utopia that maybe there would be the Collegia Psychonautica, where sort of, fellow sort of travelers of consciousness would collaborate on different theories, journey together, share our knowledge and experiences. And maybe that utopia is not so far away, because it's very heartwarming to be here today, surrounded by all these sort of fellow travelers. So here we are, sharing experiences. Maybe it's not such a distant dream. But anyway, that's a little segue into this particular story, which I titled 30 Days in Hyperspace. So, first thing I want to talk about is where the inspiration for this came from. And I call it this serendipitous inspiration, because I would love to be able to say that this was an extremely well-planned, well-controlled, thought-out experiment that I'd really put the work into. But that's just not true at all. And as you'll hear, at least conceptually, it was more like a kind of happy accident. And I realize that sounds absolutely absurd to say that I accidentally dosed myself with the most powerful psychedelic substance on the planet 30 times in a row. But yeah, hopefully all will be explained. I do just want to add a few disclaimers here. The first thing is that when I talk about taking DMT every day for 30 days, I'm not saying this because I think it's something particularly remarkable or heroic, and I'm certainly not trying to say like, hey, I'm some sort of tough guy, I'm like, look how much drugs I've taken. That's really not it at all. Just to kind of put this into context of why I don't think it's so remarkable. If you talk to some of these traditional shamans who have been very lucky to meet from the South American traditions, then they'll tell you that like part of their training is to drink ayahuasca, the DMT brew. They do this multiple times a day, every day, for 6, 9, 12 months sequentially. So in comparison to that, like what I did is really nothing special. And this also somewhat answers the question of whether this was a reckless or a dangerous thing to do. Because, is it physically dangerous to do this kind of sequential dosing? And I think that based upon the stories of these shamans and the period of time that these guys do it, then the answer at least appears to be no. Of course, second to that, there's also a question of whether it's psychologically dangerous. But again, this example of traditional shamanism would suggest not. Because like I said, having spent some time with these guys, as I say, being very fortunate to count a few of them as my friends, these are some of the most nicest, grounded, like down-to-earth people that I've ever met. And so it didn't seem like there was something inherent to the substance or the experience itself which was either physically or psychologically dangerous. Also, it's fairly well understood that DMT clears out of your system very quickly. This is why it has this notorious 5-minute trip. So it doesn't build up any kind of tolerance or cause any hangover. It's really the kind of the perfect substance to do this kind of experiment on. You just couldn't do the same kind of thing with psilocybin or LSD because it would just build up this tolerance. You just need ever-increasing dosages. That said, I'm not advocating that this is someone that anyone should just do, particularly if you are new to psychedelics. Just in terms of harm reduction, there is a lot of great material out there, particularly like what these guys from the Zendo project have done. So if you are thinking of doing something like this, I'm not going to repeat all their stuff. I don't feel like it's my position to sort of preach, what you should and shouldn't do. But I would say there's some good information out there, so just make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. There's a fly here. And this especially applies to MAOIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which I am going to talk about later on. So really do your homework before experimenting with MAOIs, because the risk profile is completely different to just DMT. Cool. So now that all my disclaimers are out the way, and hopefully I'm not doing anything sort of too crazy. So for anyone who's never seen stuff on my channel, I really do a few different kinds of videos. I do stuff where I get to talk to people in the psychedelic community. I did an interview recently with Andrew Gallimore, who's kind of behind the extended state DMT stuff. And yeah, just talk with either other psychonauts or other researchers. So there's that kind of content. I also do these retreat reviews. As I mentioned, I've done quite a bit of traveling around South America. And I like to sort of try and look at these places objectively, because what I find is it's very hard for people to separate out the subjective experience they're having with the medicine from the objective sort of quality of the place itself. So I try and look at these places and say, is it worth the money? Is this a bit culty? Is it in a kind of, was it just a good location? I also do these kind of videos, which is where I do these kind of trip reports, and this is where these are the stuff where I just have fun, try and recreate visually some of these bombastic, extraordinary experiences. And yeah, I have a lot of fun doing those. But then the final sort of content I do is these, which is, as Jason alluded to earlier, I do sort of guidance videos talking through some of the more technical aspects of how to achieve some of these crazy bombastic sort of experiences. And these are by orders of magnitude. This is where most of the views of my channel comes from. And I think it's pretty obvious why these guide videos are so popular, because I think Jason's probably the perfect example here. It's because vaping DMT and achieving one of these kind of transcendent, life-changing experiences is an absolute pain in the ass. It's such a sort of technical and finicky process. You have to get the substance hot enough in order for it to vaporize, but not so hot that it burns, because otherwise that's kind of completely useless. You have to get enough of it into your system in a very short space of time. And you have to do all that while reality is just unraveling around you. It's a really complex process. And so, yeah, it's not intuitive at all. And so it's no surprise that people go looking for ways to find how to do this. I'm just going to have a little quick rant now, because, yeah, this is one of the reasons why I've just to sidestep into some of the kind of the bullshit that goes on around DMT. There's all this, one that really sort of piqued my interest at the moment is this stuff around how people try and pull DMT into sort of to give it some validity through biblical stories. And I don't know if you've come across this particular bit of mythology, how the story of the burning bush in the Bible, how the Moses came upon the burning bush, and so therefore it must have been an acacia bush, and the acacia bush contains a lot of DMT. So Moses was actually smoking DMT, and that's why he was speaking to God, because he was having this DMT experience through the acacia bush. And having done the sort of videos, I'm like, absolutely not. You cannot just stand next to a fucking bush that's on fire in the open space of the Middle East with goats nibbling on your coats. It just doesn't work like that. It would be awesome if it did, but it's really complicated. So this kind of nonsense of whoa, this must have been DMT. No. It sounds good on a Joe Rogan podcast, but the reality is like I say, smoking DMT, it's an absolute pain in the ass. Anyway, slight digress there, because it was just a... So yeah, the point really is, I make videos about the best way to vape DMT using various methods and gadgets, and I've kind of brought an example of one here. And part of doing this kind of working out what is best and being able to tell people about it is that I have to test how these things work. Because some of them work really well, some of them work spectacularly well, and some of them don't work at all. I say some of these things will just burn your substance and leave you with just scorched lungs. So it's kind of my self-appointed job and hobby to test these things out and let people know the results. And kind of followed in the sort of proud Swiss tradition of Albert Hofmann, if you're doing experiments then with mind-bending substances, then what better way to do it is just test it on yourself and see what happens. So I was making this video, this was back in December 2021, and I was doing some testing on various vaping devices, kind of like this one here. And like I say, the only way to do some testing is to do some testing. And so it kind of looks a little bit like this. You get one of these devices and you kind of sat there and you're sort of trying to, get it set up. So you kind of do a little bit of tinkering and kind of sort of, yeah, okay. Okay, no, okay. So you go back, get a screwdriver out, you tinker around with these things, and you kind of sat there and, okay, right, okay. And then you just adjust some settings and you kind of like, you're getting a bit pissed off. And then the world just kind of explodes into like fractal reality. And yeah, pretty much this happens. And that, usually when I'm kind of doing this thing, that brings the day's testing to an end, because then suddenly your mind is in a completely different place and I'm not thinking about adjusting things with screwdrivers. So what I do then is I'll go lie down, chill out, think about bonkers things, and yeah, that brings the day's testing to a close and I'll pick it up the next day. Now, just to be clear, when I do this, these doses of DMT, it's not full breakthrough doses. So I wasn't having like full, complete like entities, like in the cosmic womb kind of thing. Not yet, anyway, that will come later. But this is DMT, so even like small doses are just incredibly trippy, incredibly powerful. So this, I just want to make clear, this was not micro-dosing by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't macro-dosing. It's somewhere in the middle, probably I'm guessing around about like 20 milligrams per hit. Just going to take a quick drink. So, like I say, I was testing these for a video, and I did this for a few days. It got to about day 3 of testing, and I realized a couple of things. So first realization was, I've now done DMT 3 days on the run. Secondly, that these cumulative experiences were having a noticeable impact on me. A couple of effects I was noticing. Firstly, I was noticing some new aspects to the experience that I hadn't picked up on before, and I'll get more into that later on. Also, I had this, it was like I drank from the fountain of creativity. My imagination was just completely unbounded, so I was just thinking of like new amazing things, or what I thought was new and amazing things to do. And I just felt inspired, and like when I say inspired, this felt like divine inspiration. I felt like the universe was telling me that this was something I had to do, that I had to completely immerse myself in this DMT experience for 30 days and then report my findings. I thought this was something the world needed to hear. So basically it just came to me as this like fully formed idea. I should do this for exactly 30 days. Why 30 days? I don't know. I don't know where that number came from. Also, that I should document the whole thing in the form of video blogs. So my original idea was I was going to live stream this as it was happening. So you can see the sort of the camera setups that we've got here. Just imagine this taking place, like there being a permanent room set up in my apartment, so that every day I would like go to my grotto and sort of like have this absolutely crazy experience and just beam it out to the world. needless to say, that idea didn't stick. I didn't go with that one in the end, but it was the original idea. Yeah, it was almost going to be like a psychedelic reality show that I was kind of planning, and I was kind of, yeah. I mean, like I say, it seemed like a good idea at the time. So yeah, what I realized was just the logistics of doing this, also taking up that much space in my family's sort of apartment. Like, I'm going to explain this to my kids that I've got these cameras set up, and like, yeah, Daddy's just going nuts in the floor. So I decided to drop that part of the idea. And also I realized it just wasn't a good idea to broadcast this thing out in real time because, as we all know, yeah, when you're dealing with DMT, things get a little bit weird. And speaking of weird, this is one of my favorite quotes from the legendary Hunter Thompson, which really sums up where my head was going with this, which is, yeah, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. Like, when things are getting a bit strange, just go all in. Don't fight it. Like, something's going on, just make this your thing. And so I did kind of like this gonzo methodology of just completely immersing myself into this experience and then reporting on it while being in that state. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Hunter Thompson, so there's like a certain appeal to following in his footsteps here. Also, it did feel like there was some sort of like scientific project happening, because like I mentioned earlier, I was aware of this kind of tripping for months thing that goes on in the Amazon. And I've always been interested in, we talk about this psychedelic renaissance and how psychedelics are kind of going to spread across the sort of the Western world. And we look at these cultures that have this, psychedelics baked in, and we try and think, well, how can we do something like this in the Western world? Where's our tradition? Where's our sort of thing? So I was kind of looking at this like, is there a Western version of this kind of like psychedelic diet that these guys are doing? We need to make our own thing, and maybe this could be, part of that. So yeah, it just felt like the DMT was telling me, look, you've already started this, dude, go for it. Looking back a little bit now, I do think I was probably having some like delusions of grandeur about how groundbreaking and sort of like necessary this was to do. But I think, common sense kicked in. I decided not to do the live stream thing, just to take the DMT, have the experience, and then immediately afterwards I would record or journal what was happening. And then at the end of it, I would sort of stitch all this together into, yeah, some sort of, a summary of what happened, and that's what I did do in the videos up on my channel. Okay, so that was all my reasoning. What I did next was to plan out what this was actually going to look like in terms of a schedule. So I made a rough timetable. It was something like this. So with the 3 days that I was already in, plus the 27 that I've got laid out here, that was my 30 days, so my little DIY experiment. So just to explain what kind of dosages we're looking at here, the light dosages were something around like 20 milligrams. So this was enough to get a kind of like a head shift, certainly to see some visuals, but staying firmly on this side of the experience. The medium doses would be about 20 to 35 milligrams. This is where you kind of on the cusp, sometimes dipping over a little bit. Just to mention as well, with these kind of doses, because we're using some of these vaping stuff, the dosages are kind of be a lot more potent than what it'd be if you're smoking it through like a glass pipe or something, because you really do get everything. There's very little going to waste. And then the strong ones, which are kind of more of like a weekly event, this would be like a breakthrough dose. So this would be kind of in like the 50 milligram kind of range at this point. And then you can see the final one is, so this was a very strong dose plus a MAOI, so a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, basically a quick explanation is that taking an MAOI in conjunction with the DMT or before you take DMT, it greatly extends the duration, but also the intensity of the experience. So instead of lasting kind of like 5 to 10 minutes, it can go on for about 45 minutes to an hour, which I figured would be the perfect finale for this kind of like psychedelic marathon. And I'll cover some more on that later. Okay. So what actually happened? Yeah, so now I'm going to talk about what happened as I was in it, and I'm having these experiences on a daily basis. And as you would expect, this was now some very unusual, very interesting experiences. Now, I'm not going to go through each day and say what happened, because we'll just be here all night, although you can certainly ask me afterwards if you want to. But just assume as a baseline, each one of these was just bonkers in the most awesome possible way. Even at the lower doses, it was extremely trippy. And there certainly was a feeling of these things stacking up, the headspace stacked up over time. What I am going to talk about, though, are the things that I noticed from doing this that I hadn't really picked up before in all my kind of years of DMT usage. And also I'm going to explain why I think I hadn't picked up these things before. So it's my kind of like hypothesis that the reason most people are attracted to doing DMT is this. It's the breakthrough. It's what you kind of hear about. It's Joe Rogan talking about aliens, or Terence McKenna talking about, probably aliens as well. Whatever, everything that you kind of hear, all the hype about DMT, it's all this kind of talking to God, riding in a UFO, reality breaking, elves, entities, all that stuff. It's all related to this. It's all about the breakthrough. So most people who get into DMT are pursuing this. This is what they're trying to achieve, like the legendary breakthrough. It's certainly what I was trying to achieve. And I had many, many breakthroughs as a result. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. Like, as I say, I think a DMT breakthrough is the most extraordinary experience on the planet, bar none. But because people are constantly chasing this breakthrough, and because of the nature of taking DMT, and that you have to get so much into in such a short space of time, you kind of arrive fully baked into the experience. And so you can miss out on a lot of the little effects that happen, which I think stack up on top of each other in order to create this breakthrough experience. So we miss out on a lot of these little subjective effects. And what I noticed is that by doing these smaller doses, it allowed me to kind of see some of the pathways to which we get there. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. So the first one of these I noticed was what I've called consciousness division. So during a DMT experience, it's quite common for me to have the experience of being in multiple places at the same time, like I'm in parallel realities, the multiverse, across different dimensions, whatever language you want to apply to it. But it's that feeling of being in many places all at the same time, having different experiences all at the same time. Now, previously, when I've gone for a full breakthrough experience, then I only noticed this once it occurred. As I said, you arrive in this space where it's kind of all happening all at once. But when I did this slower these smaller doses, then you get a much better observation of what's happening in the curve between these two states and how that division takes place. Because it's not just getting drowned out by all this kind of psychedelic chaos and fireworks. And so basically you can see what this journey into this consciousness division looks like. And subjectively, it feels something like cellular division is taking place, almost like during its embryonic development, in that one instance of consciousness splits perfectly into two, then possibly again into four, and so on. But each bubble here is an instance of consciousness, and it's having its own experience. And these are not just perfect clones of each other. So just like you have biological twins and they separate, at the point of separation, each one is now going down its own separate path. It's having its own experiences. And because these experiences are being impacted by just the crazy nature of DMT, you can end up with two very different experiences, but feel like they are both happening at the same time. I mean, it's just completely fucking nuts, but it's amazing. And I think this feeling of this consciousness separation, I think this is probably one of the reasons why the come up to DMT is accompanied by quite a lot of anxiety. Because this slicing up of consciousness, as I say, once you arrive there, it can feel very awesome and it all kind of makes sense. But if you're on these lower doses and you're feeling it sort of happening to you, it can be a very weird, sometimes quite uncomfortable experience. So it's kind of not really surprised that, there's a lot of anxiety associated with the come up. And I think the reason for this anxiety is completely rational, because, your brain in its normal mode of operation is trying to do one thing. It is trying to maintain like a homeostasis of what is reality, which way is up, which way is down. And then suddenly you have sort of DMT just re-rolling the parameters of reality, and like your brain just thinking, fuck, like no, just like it's trying to maintain its grip, but as it's being kind of separated. So yeah, I think this kind of anxiety is a perfectly sort of normal response to what is happening. And I had some very weird experiences doing this. I even had one where there was part of me or one of these kind of instances of consciousness, which completely knew that it had taken DMT and was having this kind of DMT experience unfolding. And then another one which had no idea it had taken DMT and was kind of like, and then there's almost then like an observer wondering which one of these is me. So it can get really, very sort of weird and complex. But once you get past that sort of anxiety, then I believe this consciousness division is like a key part of the DMT experience. It could be even why DMT is beneficial in cases of like healing trauma or PTSD, because this division that I'm talking about, it gives you different versions of you having different experiences and different perspectives and ideas and sort of ways that you can look at problems in a way that the singular person just can't. It's just not got the manpower for. So you're basically brute forcing some sort of problem. So it's like if you had a task that might take like one person a year to solve, well, now you have 100 people, and so now that problem's not quite as unmanageable. And just keep in mind that with all this that I'm describing, this all happens within the space of about 30 seconds. So after that, then the reverse starts happening. So in that these separate bubbles of consciousness then start to like coalesce and reunify, but they've all now got their own separate stories and their own separate experiences. And so as they kind of come back together and reunify, you get this quite euphoric feeling of resolution. It feels fulfilling. It feels like not only are you becoming sort of whole again, you're actually becoming greater, because you've got all these separate stories that have happened come back together, and it just feels resolved. It feels, certainly I feel euphoria from it. It's almost like there's a lot of experience coalescing from all these mini adventures that's just happened. And of course, the really, really funny thing about all this newly gained experience, all this newly gained knowledge, is that you have complete and total understanding of it for about a minute. And then after that, you're just going to be wondering what the fuck just happened. But still, in that moment, it's amazing. Now, I just want to do a quick sidestep while I'm talking about this kind of consciousness division here, just to talk briefly about 5-MeO-DMT and how that relates to this kind of consciousness division. And the short answer is it absolutely doesn't. I do get a lot of messages from people who assume that just because these things have a very similar name, that they contain DMT, that they're just slight variations of the same thing. And the reality is these are two very different experiences, with the main characteristics, I would say, of DMT and NDMT doing what I just described. It explodes outwards into this kind of fractal sort of, many instances of you. And 5-MeO-DMT almost doing the complete opposite of collapsing inwards into this kind of one unified sort of non-dual experience. The reason I mention this, as I say, there does seem to be some confusion around these things. I've even had people messaging me, like asking if it would be a good thing to do these things together, like to put them in the same device and smoke together. I do know people who've done that. They've reported it's absolutely horrible, because you have this push-pull of something trying to explode you and something trying to unify you. So yeah, my recommendation is don't do that and don't get these things confused. Also, 5-MeO has a very different kind of risk profile with it, so just do your research. I'm not trying to diss 5-MeO-DMT, by the way. I think this is also an amazing experience. But yeah, it's just do your homework if that's something you're looking to get into. Okay, so the next kind of like phenomenon I noticed is what I called thought acceleration. Now, it's pretty easy to explain, but I think it raises a few like interesting possibilities about what might be happening within the DMT experience. Because basically, as the substance takes effect, what I noticed was that my thoughts would increase in velocity. It's like as if somebody had turned up the playback speed or was playing back the samples sort of faster. I'll try and recreate it without it sounding too silly, but it's like, you know, if this was my thoughts and this was my thoughts and this was my thoughts and this, and it kind of accelerates like that. Now, I'd observed this many, many times previously when I'd taken DMT, but I'd always assumed it was an auditory phenomenon because normally I'd have some music on in the background and you would hear it increase in velocity like I've just described. But when I was doing this, most of these experiences were in complete silence. And so what I was hearing was the thoughts within my brain kind of like speeding up. It was like there was sort of like it was like the computer was being overclocked. There was more cycles happening. And as a result, there was kind of like, there was just more processing happening. And this kind of matches quite nicely with this kind of subjective feeling of suddenly having like vast amounts of new understanding or sort of new knowledge. It's not that, like I say, it's not that like new brain powers come available. It's just that it's processing faster. This also might account for the feeling within a DMT trip of time passing. It's very common for people to report, even just being away for 5 minutes, that they've been away for like 5,000 years or something like that. So there's like a time dilation effect because really what's happening is just you're kind of processing things faster. So yeah. Now, yeah, I can't really talk about this whole sort of 30-day affair without talking about what happened at the end of it, which, as I mentioned, this is when I took DMT and a monoamine oxidase inhibitor at the same time. So yeah, basically what happened is I took the MEOI, I waited for about an hour, and then I started hitting one of these DMT vapes. Now, chemically, what's going on here is very similar to ayahuasca. In fact, the name for this kind of combination within the psychedelic community is vaporhoasca, and it produces a very similar effect, but it's not identical. There are some quite distinct differences. The main similarity, though, is that instead of, again, this 5-minute trip, you now get this kind of 45-minute trip, and you can redose at any time within that period. So you could take another 45-minute trip, and you can also stack these things on top of each other for a much more intense 45-minute trip. So it's really, you just get this huge window of opportunity to explore this DMT space. Also, it's not just the duration that increases. It's tricky to find the word for it. The best word I could think for this is the intensity or the vividness of the experience vastly increased. And this seems to be common. I've talked to a lot of people who've done this, and yeah, they all kind of agree it somewhat changes the nature of the experience. It goes from, you don't really have this feeling of, people often describe vape DMT as being fired out of a cannon, like it's just this 5-minute ball of chaos. When you do it with an MEOI, the experience slows down somewhat. It's still completely bonkers with all this kind of very, random, amazing narrative, just pure imagination unleashed. But it feels like it's at a somewhat more manageable velocity. Which is actually, a good thing. It also feels that velocity lingers through to when you're coming down from it. So as just mentioned earlier, when the point where you're coming out of a DMT experience, you have this moment of like, everything. Oh no, I don't know anything. That sort of, you feel like you've got longer to process and integrate what's happened within this experience. But yeah, in terms of what happened specifically here, this was probably the most bizarre, astonishing experience of my life out of all the various things that I've done. This was one of the weirdest. It was complete nuts. I did end up making quite a few videos talking about this. So if you're interested, you can go and sort of look at my channel. But yeah, I had stuff like can you see this picture? I was seeing myself as part of like the Hindu pantheon of like multi-armed sort of Vishnu gods. I was having like deep metaphysical conversations with myself. At one point, I thought I was in like a telepathic conversation with like some kind of hyperdimensional help desk call center with different DMT entities, all dressed as like customer service reps, wearing ties and name badges, trying to help me solve the universe. It was one of the craziest experiences of my life. And I'm just going to expand out a little bit on this hyperdimensional call center. I'm probably going to show my age here, but does anybody know what I'm talking about when I talk about Clippy, the assistant? Whew, okay, good. So yeah, just for anybody who doesn't, yeah, Clippy was a kind of very early form of chatbot that was like built into Windows and Microsoft Office, and it would, whenever it thought you needed assistance, it was so cruel because it was trying to be helpful, but it was just so annoying. It would pop up with these really just, winking its eyebrows, just these really creepy animations, and it was just, like, no, Clippy, I don't need help right now. So yeah, it was kind of, Clippy was pretty much universally despised. But the reason I mention this is that I kind of had this phenomenon happening throughout this 30-day experience. It was remarkably consistent in that every so often this kind of like, DMT entities are by sort of definition very cartoon-like, or at least they are for me. And yeah, this kind of cartoon-like, sort of, quite comical, animated character would pop in, and it would pop in from the sort of side of my experience. The experience would be happening, in 360 degrees here, but then this little thing would like pop in, like, "Hey Rob, everything going okay?" And then just like disappear out again. And so this would be there even through some of the kind of smaller doses. Always helpful, always kind of welcome. But yeah, then when I got into the sort of the larger doses. Then yeah, it was kind of like, it was popping in like, "Hey, looks like you need some help with 10th dimensional trigonometry," sort of, offering like sort of some profound advice. And then with the MAOI dose, as I mentioned, this then escalated into, because this was, like I say, one of the most intense experiences of my life. Like at some point I was like, "Oh, I have fucked my brain here. Like this is it, Rob, you've done it now." And in pops Clippy, and he's like, "Okay, how can I help?" I'm like, "Clippy, I need you, dude." and so, yeah, he's like, "Okay, we'll get you onto the help desk." And so he escalated me through this customer service pathway. And it was, like something, I was having this profound experience, but overlaid with this feeling of people trying to, it was like almost like working a patch bay of like, like a telephone exchange, plugging wires back in to sort of get me back on track. But it kind of left me with the feeling that there is something either within this experience or just within the human being, that there is something that feels like a help function, something that kicks in to sort of, to guide us in these sort of moments of weirdness or crisis or whatever. So yeah, I'll just throw that out there, Clippy the brain assistant. Now, obviously, there's a lot more I could say about all of this because, yeah, DMT is just like a landscape of endless novelty. But I've got to wrap it up all, somehow. So, I could ask myself, what did I get from all this? How did I go about integrating the enormity of having this kind of experience for 30 days? Did it help? Did I get anything from it? Did I learn anything? And those are some pretty big questions, and I've been talking for quite a while already, so unfortunately I don't have the time to answer them in the kind of detail that these kind of topics deserve. What I will do is a bit of a shameless plug. I will say I have made videos about all this stuff, so if you want to, go and check out, on my channel if you're interested in hearing more about all this. But I don't just want to leave you hanging because, like the DMT experience itself, I kind of want this story to resolve. So let me try and put it like this. Just imagine that if every night, just before you went to bed, you could just instantly teleport yourself to the International Space Station, and you could spend 5 minutes just like looking down on the Earth in what would be like a truly astonishing, like once in a lifetime experience. Just imagine you could do that every night, some mystical piece of technology that you could do. Just try and imagine the kind of like what that change in perspective, what kind of thoughts might arise from you. Thoughts about your life, about your family, about your ancestral lineage, your role within the sort of the epic song of the human race, or even like in your role within the universe. And even though you have just 5 minutes with which to absorb the enormity of all of that change in perspective, that radical change in perspective, this would be a life-changing moment. And it's purely based upon having a different perspective. No, I didn't have a magical teleporter that could take me to the International Space Station, but I did have another method with which to experience a completely different worldview and to just have some completely different sort of thoughts. And I don't want to be so bold as to claim that what I did equates to what our fellow human beings do on the International Space Station. But I do think the core principle is similar. And that is that just stepping outside of yourself, even for just 5 minutes, and having a completely different perspective is an experience worth happening. And now just imagine having that moment every night for a month. Maybe it's too much, maybe not. I'll let you decide, but for me, it had a lot of value. And on that note, I'll say thank you all for listening, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.